Tombs sealed for over 2,000 years, staircases you wouldn't think still exist, and burial chambers that somehow stayed untouched while whole civilizations came and went. These are more mysterious objects found in places that were sealed for decades. Archaeologists in Italy found something that almost never happens anymore, an ancient tomb that grave robbers never got to. Most tombs from this period were cleaned out centuries ago. You walk in, there's basically nothing left. Maybe some broken pottery, bones here and there, whatever the looters didn't want, but this one had a massive stone slab still blocking the entrance, exactly where it had been placed around 2,600 years ago. When researchers finally moved it and went inside, 4 skeletons were lying on carved stone beds, and surrounding them were over 100 objects: iron weapons, bronze decorations, ceramic jars, all of it sitting right where someone had placed it in the 7th century BCE. The tomb belonged to the Etruscans, the civilization that occupied Italy before Rome took over. Historians actually relied heavily on tombs to understand them because the Etruscans didn't leave behind a lot of written records. Finding one completely untouched, though, was almost unheard of. Archaeologist Davide Zori, who worked on the excavation, called it a, quote, unique opportunity for our project to study the beliefs and burial traditions of this fascinating pre-Roman culture. A couple years ago, also in Italy, archaeologists opened a Roman tomb near Naples that had been sealed for close to 2,000 years. Parts of what was inside still look surprisingly fresh. They nicknamed it the Tomb of Cerberus after a large painted image on the walls, Cerberus being the 3-headed dog from Roman mythology that guarded the entrance to the underworld. The tomb was found during work at an old burial area that dated back to the Roman Empire, and when researchers went inside, they found burial niches built into the walls with artifacts nobody had touched since the 2nd century. And then the thing that really caught everyone off guard, a body lying on a stone bed that had partially mummified on its own. Hair and parts of the skin were still there. The tomb had stayed sealed tightly enough for so long that moisture barely got in, so that's what kept everything preserved. In France, a team restoring an old medieval church found something nobody expected when they pulled up the floor, a hidden staircase that led down into a sealed burial vault. The church had been in rough shape for years because of a bad renovation in the 70s. Workers back then had installed a heated concrete floor inside, which trapped moisture and salt underneath it, and over time the stones started breaking apart. While crews were digging down to figure out how bad the damage was, they hit the staircase, went down into a vault that had been shut for at least 400 years, and inside were dozens of people buried in wooden coffins, adults and children mixed together. What researchers noticed pretty quickly was that the space had been used over and over again across different generations. As newer burials were added, older bones had been pushed to the sides to clear the room. Archaeologists think the vault may have filled up fast during some kind of disaster, a famine, disease maybe, and the deeper they went, the further back in time they went. Underneath the vault, they found stone coffins going back roughly 1,500 years. Construction workers in Hungary were digging near an old Roman cemetery when they hit a massive stone coffin, several tons of carved limestone that's been sealed shut for about 1,700 years. Researchers could tell right away it was not an ordinary burial. The coffin had been built and sealed with real care, and parts of it had been reinforced with metal clamps and lead to keep air and moisture out. Since most Roman burials like this were looted long ago, the team figured it would probably be empty. It wasn't. Inside were the remains of a young woman, along with glass bottles, jewelry, amber beads, bronze objects, iron nails, and fabric woven with gold thread. Traces of red pigment and decorative plaster were still preserved inside the coffin walls. Researcher Zsolt Mrav described it as, quote, one of the most extraordinary Roman period burials ever found in Budapest. The team is still examining everything to work out who she was and why she had such an elaborate burial. Researchers working in the ancient city of Petra, Jordan, had suspected for a long time that there were hidden chambers beneath the treasury. Using ground-penetrating radar, they picked up something underground, and when they finally got permission to dig, they found a sealed chamber that hadn't been opened in around 2,000 years. Inside was a tomb with the remains of 12 people, along with bronze items, iron tools, pottery, and ceramics spread around the chamber exactly where they'd been left. One of the ceramic pieces, a cup, drew a lot of attention because it looked kind of similar to the Holy Grail prop from Indiana Jones. What made this find stand out was its condition. Most burial chambers in Petra had been emptied out over time. This one was still completely intact, basically untouched since it was sealed. Archaeologists digging in northern Egypt found something buried in the courtyard of an ancient royal palace that was hard to make sense of at first, and it was grim. There were 3 pits filled with severed right hands, and not just a few, at least 12 in total. Again, all right hands, deliberately placed in pits directly in front of what used to be a throne room. The site dates to roughly 1640 to 1530 BCE. The fingers were often spread out, palms facing different directions, like someone had arranged them before putting them in the ground. Most belonged to adult males, though one may have come from a female, so that was kinda odd too. Why only one female? When they looked at the cuts, they were clean. They weren't hacked off in a hurry, so these were taken carefully, probably pretty soon after death, not dug up from old graves or anything like that either. The working theory is that it was some kind of ritual, maybe a way of presenting defeated enemies as trophies, but nobody's landed on a definitive answer quite yet. Archaeologists in southern Norway were scanning farmland with ground-penetrating radar when something showed up in the data that did not look natural. The shape was too clean, it was too deliberate. The more they looked at it, the more it looked like a ship, and it turned out that they were right. Underneath the soil was a Viking ship burial that had been sitting there for over 1,000 years. The wood was long gone, but the shape of the hull was still perfectly readable in the dirt, traced out by iron nails still sitting exactly where they'd been hammered in. The mound that would have originally sat on top had been worn flat by centuries of farming, which is probably why nobody ever stumbled across it. Inside the ship's outline, researchers found signs of burial chambers and traces of objects that had been placed with whoever was buried there. Ship burials like this were not done just for anyone. They took an enormous amount of work. They were saved for high-status people. A lot of people think that Vikings were all buried like this, which would be awesome. It just wasn't the case. What got researchers excited was how clearly the whole thing had survived underground even after the wood rotted away. The full layout, it was still there. It was like an outline pressed into the earth. In the Venice Lagoon, researchers had been suspicious for decades that something man-made was sitting on the bottom. Surveys back in the 80s had picked up what looked like structures down there, but nobody could say for sure what they were. Well, that changed in 2021 when a geophysicist named Fentina Madricardo published a study using high-resolution sonar mapping, finally confirmed there is a Roman road down there, stretching for over 1,100 meters, or just over 3,600 feet. Divers went down to check and found the actual paving stones, called basali, which are the big, heavy stones Romans used to build their roads. Smooth on top, curved at the bottom. 2,000 years ago, this was dry land, a sandy ridge that people actually walked and traveled on. Since then, sea levels in the lagoon have risen about 2.5 meters, and the whole route went underwater. Along with the road, the team found massive foundations nearby, some close to 9 feet tall and 170 feet long. And they think that they were part of a harbor or a dock. Researchers said that the, quote, presence of the ancient Roman road confirms that there were permanent settlements in the area centuries before the foundation of Venice. So, long before Venice existed as a city, this part of the lagoon was a busy place with roads, ports, and people moving goods around, so the history of the area goes back a lot further than most people realize. That has been the video, and I will catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next one.